giving their name, ward, and clarifying if they're a member of the Formartine Area Committee or IS Infrastructure Services Committee, or both. Can all attendees online mute their microphones when not speaking? If any councillors or officers lose connection or have any technical issues during the meeting, we have IT support available online, and today that will be Gary McGill. Please contact him directly. For those attending in person, there are no fire alarms scheduled for testing today, and if the alarms go off, the nearest fire exit is back down the stairs you came up. Toilets are located outside the committee room, as is a water cooler. And we may schedule a formal break depending on the length of session today, but I will advise accordingly. Before we make a start, can I ask Amanda Rowe, Area Manager, to read out the procedure for the predetermination hearings and confirm which councillors and officers we have in attendance. Amanda, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. At the hearing today, the Chair will welcome the parties, explain the purpose and format of the hearing. The Chair will ask those who wish to speak to indicate at the start so that the sequence can be agreed. The Chair will explain that the hearing has been arranged to allow third parties, not necessarily objectors, to give their views with the benefit of statement from a planning officer and description of the proposal from the applicant before the committee will reach a final decision on the planning application. The Chair will explain that third parties should focus their comments on their views already expressed in writing, although if any new information is presented by the applicant or the planning official or any previous understanding is clarified, comment is allowed. The planning officer will identify in no more than 10 minutes the planning policies against which the application is to be assessed and draw attention to any other key material considerations. Any other relevant officer will identify their concerns. The applicant or agent in no more than 10 minutes will outline the application and address any written representations. Those wishing to make representation in no more than 10 minutes will be heard, with precedence being given to representatives of community councils and other community bodies, followed by those who are speaking on behalf of several bodies, and then by individuals. If any party wishes longer than the recommended 10 minutes, the Chair should seek the views of other parties present and make a decision following discussions with other members of the hearing in light of the current circumstances. Councillors appointed to hold the hearing are allowed to ask questions of any of the parties to clarify points raised and, if necessary, may recall a previous participant to give a view to clarify a point. After all parties have concluded their presentations, the Chair will ask the party if they're satisfied that they have had the opportunity to put their views forward today. If appropriate, the Chair will indicate that a report of the hearing and an officer's report will be considered at a committee meeting in the near future, and the Chair will then close the meeting. In terms of attendance, today we have 14 councillors in attendance. Online we have Councillor Jeff Crowson, Councillor John Cox, Councillor Don Black, Councillor Mel Sullivan, Councillor Jim Gifford, Councillor John Crawley and Councillor Louise McAllister. In the room we have Councillor Ian Taylor as Chair, we have Councillor Alan Taylor who is Chair of Infrastructure Services Committee. Turner, what did I say? Taylor, apologies. My apologies, Councillor Alan Turner, Chair of Infrastructure Services Committee. We have Councillor Anne Stirling, Councillor Andrew Hassan, Councillor Isabel Davidson, Councillor Gillian Owen and Councillor Alistair Forsyth. Councillors, can I please advise that there will be no drone footage this morning? Due to the exceptional weather conditions over the last 2 weeks, unfortunately it's been impossible to source the required drone footage for this hearing. The Chair has been made aware of this and we have been advised that the drone footage will be made available when the planning application is considered by committee. Today the planning officer will show photos and aerial photos as part of her presentation. We have 2 officers from the planning service in attendance today. We have Sarah Graham, Planning Officer, and we have Elizabeth Tully, Senior Planning Officer. And finally, we also have myself, Amanda Rowe, Area Manager, Kirsten Sutherland-George, Solicitor, Claire Young and Emma Nichol, Area Committee Officers. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Amanda. I will now confirm the purpose of today's session. The hearing has been arranged to allow those with a stated interest in the application to give their views. I would take this opportunity to remind councillors that this is an information gathering session only and that debate will not be entered into during the hearing. Following the hearing, a planning report will be circulated to the Formatting Area Committee, along with a note of the predetermination hearing. The Area Committee will then forward its views on the application to the Infrastructure Services Committee for its consideration when determining the application. Although the meeting is open to the public, only the applicant, relevant officers, consultees, and those with a valid letter of representation to the application who have submitted a request to speak within the necessary timelines will be permitted to speak. Speakers are allowed up to a maximum of 10 minutes and should focus their comments on views they've already expressed in writing. Only councillors are permitted to ask questions of the speakers and may recall a previous speaker for a clarification if necessary. The following parties have already intimated their wish to speak, and these are the planning officer, Sarah Graham. The applicant, representing Caledonia, will be Darren James, along with associates Stuart Murison, Jessica Antis, Sarava Verma, and I hope I've pronounced your name correctly, Craig Milroy, and Chris McEwen. For the consultees, Dr. Catherine Vincent, representing 5 Erothi Norman Manquetta Community Council, and individuals Louise Davidson and Lorna Sterling. Anyone who has not registered a request will not be permitted to speak. But first, the planning service will take us through their presentation. Sarah, please.
Thank you, Chair. Just let this load up. Can everybody see the PowerPoint?
Is that okay online?
Yes,
Yes,
thank you very much.
Yes,
Thank you.
Perfect. So this application is for planning permission in principle for the installation of offshore transmission infrastructure for the Caledonia offshore wind farm, including laying of underground cables and associated works to connect to the transmission grid, and it's at land between Maryhill and Greens at New Deer, Turriff. First half of the presentation will cover an introduction to the proposal, includes images or stills from drone footage and also site photographs to provide a context of the site, and this part of the presentation will last around 5 minutes. So this application seeks permission for up to 400 kilovolt underground cable circuits to connect the Caledonia offshore wind farm onshore substation at Burnside to the Scottish and Southern Energy Networks transmission Green substation, together with associated works. The site is located approximately 4 kilometres west of New Deer and 4 kilometres southeast of Cumminston. The site extends from the New Deer substation to the proposed substation at Greens and is 157 hectares. And please note there is a typing error in the report at paragraph 2.2 where it actually states 1.58 hectares. The route is around 3 kilometres long. And the application is for planning permission in principle, and so the exact location of the underground cable route is not yet known. Therefore, it is for the principle of a cable route and within the application boundary that permission is being sought. The detailed cable route design would be submitted to Aberdeenshire Council for approval at matter specified in condition or MSC stage once the detailed design is finalised, should this application be approved. And just to clarify, the cable route relates to the proposed Caledonia offshore wind substation, which was approved on the 4th of July 2025 under reference APP 2025-1812. Proposed cable route is required due to a change in the connection point to the SSEN substation. So this slide shows the location of the 2 SSE substation locations for context. A New Deer one to the south in purple is operational, and Greens to the north was granted consent on the 8th of October 2025. The next section includes the aerial images from drones and site photographs, and the drone images have indicative red line site boundary superimposed onto the visual. So this is the still from drone footage showing the proposed location of the offshore substation at Burnside. This is the point of connection for the proposed cable, and you can also see New Deer substation in the background to the south. This is a photograph taken from the C12B road at Maryhill, looking southeast towards the substation site. And this is a still from drone footage viewing northwest towards Maryhill from the proposed substation site. So to the north you see the C121B road at Maryhill, and the cable route would travel northeast from this point. And this photograph is taken from the existing New Deer substation looking north towards Maryhill. This is an image from drone footage which was provided by the applicant. It's the area around Maryhill Farm. So the cable route has two options around the Nuke and Abbots Haw farm, so the cable may be further to the east. This photograph is taken from the C121B looking northwest towards Maryhill Farm. Another photograph taken at Maryhill Crossroads looking southwest towards the property of the Nuke. And as we said, it may route either side of the Nuke. This is an image from drone footage at Parkhill Lodge and Parkhill Smiddy, where the cable would cross or go under the C29S. This is a photograph taken from the C29S at Parkhill looking south. So back to, view from the C29S looking south towards Maryhill. And this photograph is taken from the U1S at Greens, and we're looking southeast towards Parkhill. This is from the same location on the U1S at Greens, but this time looking south towards Parkhill Farm. And this is an image from the drone footage at Greenford, which is close to the proposed connection point into the grid substation. And another image from drone footage taken at Upper Greenfield, so above the U1S, looking east over Greens. And a photograph taken from the U1S at Greens looking southeast. And then finally, this is a sort of panoramic view, so photographs taken from Northburn, looking south. So at the very far, sorry, get the cursor. The New Deer substation's around about this point, and then we've got Greens at this side of the U1S up here. And that concludes the site visit slides. So I'll now move on to the second part of the presentation. So I'll firstly provide an overview of the proposed development and then a summary of the key policy issues. So in terms of the proposed development in front of us, it is for planning permission in principle. So as we've said, detailed information is not available at this time, and the proposed cable route would be sited within the red line boundary, with final details to be provided as part of an MSC application should this be approved. The site is located in the Greens area, running from the Burnside substation to the proposed Green substation. This shows the location of the SSE and New Deer substation. Sorry, down here. And then Green substation to the north. This is a site plan. So the parameters of the proposed development are a working cable corridor up to 100 metres wide, which would accommodate all temporary work areas required for installation. Up to 4 400 kilovolt cable circuits installed in trenches. Up to 2 temporary haul road access points from the public road. Up to 4 joint bays for each cable circuit. Up to 2 satellite construction compounds, and temporary crossing infrastructure for haul roads, watercourses and utilities. The proposed construction is via open cut trench crossings. Cables would be installed below ground level and remain underground. There would be up to 4 circuits with 2 cables in each circuit. Cables would be spaced at 2 metres within the circuit, with each circuit spaced at 20 metres to accommodate access roads between circuits. The maximum depth is expected to be 2 metres, with 1 metre between the top of the cable to the soil surface to allow agricultural work to continue following reinstatement. Joint bays are required where cables are joined, and there would be a maximum of 4 jointing bays across the length, and at these points there would be manhole covers at joining bays. In terms of access, for construction purposes, haul roads are proposed with access to be taken from the C121B and the C29S to the south of the Maryhill junction. The applicant initially proposed access from additional roads, but has clarified that access would be taken only from these 2 roads, which require no upgrades. Final access details and haul road details would be submitted as part of an MSC application. And just to cover cumulative developments, so there's clearly a number of energy related proposals in this area, and this shows the proposals as of January 2026. And just to note, there is a cumulative assessment which has been undertaken in the environmental appraisal. In terms of policy, there is high level support for renewable energy development in MPF4 and the Aberdeenshire Local Development Plan 2023. National Planning Framework 4, or MPF4, outlines spatial principles, regional priorities, national developments and planning policies to guide sustainable development across the country. The Regional Spatial Strategy for the North East specifies that this area will play a crucial role in achieving net zero, and the types of national development listed for the area will support the delivery of the spatial strategy. The list of national developments identified in MPF4 includes strategic renewable electricity generation and transmission infrastructure as National Development 3. Annex B of MPF4 designates classes of national development, including new and or upgraded infrastructure directly supporting on and offshore.
Can you just clarify, we may have an issue with people here, and would that be correct?
Speakers. So we can leave as well as you guys.
I'm going to face this, say what.
We'll distribute some. We'll distribute some mics at this stage. Councillor McAllister, Louise, please. I see your hand.
Yeah, no, thank you very much, Chair. Just when you mentioned there was difficulty hearing, I can certainly hear clearly at home, but then I can actually hear what Councillor Hassan was saying. There was a wee discussion, but I assume you weren't referring to those of us joining online. It was more in the room. Is that correct?
That is the exact situation.
Ah, right. Perfect. Thank you so much.
Okay.
Okay, if you can continue.
So the national development includes new and or upgraded infrastructure directly supporting on and offshore high voltage electricity lines, cables, interconnectors, including converter stations, switching stations and substations. So the proposed development as a major development therefore falls within this definition and is a national development. The Aberdeenshire Local Development Plan 2023, or ALDP, also has high level support for renewable energy in line with national policy. The applicable policies against which the application will be assessed against are identified in the accompanying report provided in advance of the meeting. There are other material considerations in the form of high-level documents and government guidance which support the pathway to net zero, which are also highlighted in the issues report. Localised impacts are a key consideration and do require to be addressed, so compliance on a number of policy matters is required. The main issues considered in the supporting information are air quality, ecology, geology, soils and contaminated land, archaeology and cultural heritage, noise and vibration, traffic and transport, and flood risk and water environment. The environmental appraisal report, which accompanied the application, details these topics, and a number of these issues have also been identified in public representations. With mitigation applied, the appraisal finds there are no significant impacts identified. And finally, in terms of the process moving forwards, the application is intended to be reported to Formartine Area Committee on the 24th of March for views, and to ISC, or Infrastructure Services Committee, on the 14th of May for determination, and a full assessment of the issues would be contained within the Area Committee report. So that's the end of the presentation. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you very much, Sarah. Do any councillors have any questions? Councillor Sterling, please. Aye.
Thank you very much for the presentation. I just wondered, you mentioned that the final end point or connection point would be determined under an MSC application, but to what end would local members or committees be informed as to any impacts that end connection might have out with the normal process? If it's an MSC application, then we would have no insight to that. So I just wondered how you would handle that. And you didn't mention in terms of construction and traffic movements, and perhaps that's for the applicant, but traffic movements, and again, could you give me the justification for saying that there'd be no upgrades required to local roads that are going to be used for construction traffic. I found that quite surprising. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll do the construction roads first because that's fresh. We can ask roads to come to area committee to comment further, and that's based on their consultation response, which was said that it was satisfactory. Yeah, it's to do with their consultation response. So we'll ask them to expand on that for area committee if that's okay. And in terms of MSC process, yeah, under the scheme of delegation, they can be delegated. I'm sure there are ways in which members can request otherwise, should they so wish.
I have a few questions, and I suspect it'll probably be more appropriate for the applicant, but I'll raise it here as well. First one was the siting of the joining bays. Have you any indication as to where they are and which size they are? Maybe not, and as I say, it might be more for the applicant. I would appreciate if you went back to the cumulative impact slide. Are these, I mean, some of these are already passed. Are all of them passed, or are some still in the application process? Can you differentiate which are which?
Got me to that now, yeah.
Please.
So there are a couple of these applications which are Section 36 applications and are with energy condensed units. So that's the 2 battery storage. So they're still pending, if you like. The large turquoise one to the north is Dromar, and that is at scoping stage. So that's not yet an application, but we are aware of it because it's undergoing EIA scoping. The green ball, which is the lime green, sort of side of that is has permission, it is consented. Yellow cable to the West Caledonia, it is consented, approved. New Deer substation, which is also orange, but it covers in pink things, slightly further to the north. So I'll use my pointer up here. That has permission, it's consented. Then the pink is the application before us today. And New Deer 1 and Murray East they're constructed. And there's one more. There's a small application in here for a green cable link, which is pending.
Okay, thank you very much. I found that helpful.
Sorry, Elizabeth.
Elizabeth.
Yeah, it's just to confirm that paragraph section 2.9 in the report covers all of the planning in and around the area.
Councillor Gifford, Jim, please.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Morning, everyone. Yeah, Councillor Jim Gifford, I'm a sub on ISC. I'm still not entirely clear. The list of applications, you're absolutely right, is in 2.9, and the map is busy. Is this a brand new application, or maybe you said in the introduction, I just missed it. Is this a replacement for an existing application? The cables are now going somewhere different from originally planned. Is this a whole new one, or is that a replacement?
Yeah, so it's a new application. It's a fresh application. It is for a cable link from the Caledonia substation to the National Grid Operator substation. It obviously wasn't initially known it was required, which is why it's come in at a later date. Originally, I think it had been assumed it would feed into New Deer 1, and due to change in sort of energy policy, which I think the applicant can probably cover. You can ask that question to them, be able to cover it off, but essentially you can give it a different connection point and they needed a new cable connection.
Okay, so on the screen there, the yellow Caledonia cable is the power coming in from the offshore turbines. This application is to get the power from the one substation to the other. Is that
correct? Yes.
Right. Excellent. Thank you.
I see no further hands at this stage, nothing in the room. So can I thank Sarah for her presentation, and I'll now turn to the applicant. And I think it's yourself, Darren. You'll have 10 minutes.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak at this hearing. I appreciate that there have been a number of such hearings locally recently, reflecting a spike of development in the nation's electricity infrastructure after some decades where investment was lacking. In opening, it's important to point out that this proposal contrasts sharply with other
Can everybody hear okay?
Yes, online.
Yes, online.
You pull the mic a little bit closer, Darren.
Thank you. In opening, it's important to point out that this proposal contrasts sharply with other electricity projects in terms of its extent. It is for cables connecting two substations approximately 3,300 metres or 2 miles apart and is entirely underground. Its impacts will therefore be limited to those associated with construction. While construction cannot be undertaken unnoticed, the project's impacts will therefore be temporary. Time is limited, so to try and keep what I say relevant to those attending, I'll base my remarks on the comments we received in public consultation. I turn first to the need for the project, as this was a matter often raised in our consultation. As you would recall, last summer, Aberdeenshire Council granted outline planning consent to Ocean Winds for a new onshore substation adjacent to the existing facility at New Deer, and the associated underground cables from that substation to the coast to enable new proposed Caledonia offshore wind farm to connect to the national grid. The Caledonia wind farm is a 2,000 megawatt ScotWind project next to our Murray East and Murray West facilities, both now operational in the Murray Firth. Our history stretches back to the commercial start of offshore wind in Scotland when we opened our UK headquarters office in Edinburgh in 2010. However, in terms of infrastructure and staff, the North East is our home turf. And I'm pleased to say that last year our new operations base opened in Buckie, partnering a similar facility opened in Fraserburgh 5 years ago. When a new generation facility such as Caledonia is proposed, it can't choose where to connect to the national electricity transmission grid. That is determined by the owners, who are SSEN, and the operators, who are called NESO, of the transmission grid. At the time Caledonia was first proposed, our connection point was New Deer. This was published in National Grid's Holistic Network Design Report of July 2022. The public consultations for Caledonia showed a clear preference that the project substation should be built as close as possible to the existing New Deer substation. And on this basis, we developed our proposals, eventually in 2024, applying for a new substation at Burnside, adjacent to the existing New Deer facility. The electricity transmission grid was designed for a small number of very large coal, gas and nuclear plants. It is not kept up with the changes associated with power being generated in the places where the best renewable resources are found. The result is that there is not enough grid capacity where it is needed, and to compound the problem, the process previously used to distribute what capacity was available was seen to be inefficient, potentially allocating capacity to projects which could not be built in time to use it. Britain does not stand still, and UK wide-scale actions were determined. During the years where Caledonia was developing its planning application, the owners of the grid, SSEN, were developing proposals for new infrastructure, including a new substation at Greens. And the operators and the regulators of the grid were revising the procedure to determine where and when new projects could connect. As a consequence of those actions, it has become necessary to connect the Caledonia substation at Burnside, which was awarded planning consent last June, to SSEN's proposed new substation at Greens and not New Deer. As I mentioned previously, this new Caledonia application cables which will be entirely undergrounded. This is because it will be an integrated part of the broader offshore wind transmission works delivered as part of the Caledonia project. If an overhead line was used for this application, around 12 supergrid pylons would be needed to connect between Burnside and Greens. I would now like to address key planning issues raised. Firstly, roads and traffic. This was a recurring theme of the pre-application consultation. Murray East was the first major project our company delivered, and we acknowledge the frustrations expressed during this consultation process. Since Murray East was built, we've completed a second project, Murray West. We have learned from Murray East, and we have changed our procedures to implement significant improvements with great success. The construction traffic management plan was enhanced, outlining, for example, which roads were not to be used by larger lorries, and we ensured training and how it should be implemented was communicated and given focus across all our subcontractors, with harsher penalties for those instances where there were transgressions. This was supplemented by marking all vehicles so that individual drivers could be identified readily by our site managers and the public, and installing signage at key junctions to ensure the correct routes were followed by our traffic. Murray West also sought to react quickly to concerns of damaged roads by repairing potholes during construction so that they didn't get worse. We will take those lessons forward and strive to continue improving. This is an issue we are already engaged with the Council as part of the broader Caledonia application, and will be a matter we return to for community engagement as we move from outline to full planning consent. A further issue was protection of private water supply. I want to provide reassurance here as this is a focus area for us, which comes with a wealth of our past experience and has regulatory oversight. In 2025, we undertook engagement with landowners and households within 250 metres of our planning boundary to identify the locations of private water supply sources. During the next phase of the design, we will undertake detailed assessment of potential impacts on those water supplies and commence a period of pre-construction monitoring. If our assessment identifies negative impacts to individual private water supplies, a mitigation plan will be implemented so a supply of water is maintained through construction. This would include details for ongoing monitoring during construction, provision of a suitable alternative source of water for the duration of construction works, or, if necessary, connection to the main supply. Another issue often raised in the written consultation was loss of agricultural land. Again, I stressed the temporary nature of the works. All infrastructure will be underground and full reinstatement will be implemented, so any loss will be in terms of the growing seasons lost while works are underway, and lost income will be fully compensated. I appreciate time is limited, and I would like to close by moving from some of these very obvious effects of construction to effects less obvious but more long-term. Outcomes for Aberdeenshire as a consequence of becoming the offshore wind energy capital of Scotland. Our Fraserburgh Harbour operations base spends around £100 million each year to maintain Murray East. Around half of that is spent here in Scotland and around 25% in the 3 northeast counties. It was spent by contracting with 250 companies, 136 in Scotland and 36 here in Aberdeenshire. Now, I don't want to stretch all bounds of credibility by suggesting that 3 kilometres of cable installed to modern standards requiring minimum of upkeep will directly result in contracts being signed across Aberdeenshire after its installation. But this cable is part of a wider interconnected system, a new system for energy generation, a system in which Aberdeenshire is already playing a leading part, developing specialisations among its youth and skills established at its local college for jobs that will be here for decades. 16 years ago, when we first came to the northeast with the idea of harnessing wind energy in the Moray Firth, the prospect of making a crew transfer to a turbine rather than an oil rig was a pipe dream. But last year we made tens of thousands of such transfers. And as much as every oil worker that transfers to a rig depends on an underground pipeline to make that industry viable, so will we in renewable energy depend upon an underground cable, even one only 2 miles long. I want to thank everyone for listening, and I appreciate and welcome all questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Members' questions. Isabel, Councillor Davidson, please. We'll just wait for the mic.
Could you talk a little bit about how you work with other companies that are doing developments in the area as well, about the cumulative impact on the roads and how you coordinate your traffic management with those other companies that are, you know, because we've seen how busy that map is, and if there's overlap between even two of those developments at the same time, it's going to get very congested, and there's very little road improvement proposed for that area. So how do you coordinate with other companies that are doing similar works in that area to minimise the impact and to consider local people at the same time?
Thank you. That's a really important question. We are due to enter into a tender with a company to undertake environmental consultancy and updated assessment work, and we've been open in that contract that part of that contract will require them to engage with other developers, with us supporting. We have conditions in the existing consent for Caledonia on-T works which commit us to engaging with other developers in the local area who will be building projects at the same time as us. Our contractor who will build the project works will also be responsible for engaging with other developers, with us coordinating. So we are very open that we want to engage with other projects in the local area who will be building at the same time as us. And we anticipate that there will be a working forum so that other projects will also come back and voluntarily share information with us. We undertook a cumulative traffic assessment which identified no significant impacts associated with cumulative traffic, and our cumulative traffic numbers are lower than the other projects that will be built locally. So we're confident that we will not be a tipping point in cumulative traffic issues. In terms of why we're not proposing to upgrade the roads locally, we, as Murray East, built the Murray East substation, and that requires a lot larger infrastructure to be delivered to the site than the works for installing the 3 kilometres of cable. That project would have had to upgrade the road and make sure that it's able to deliver what are called abnormal indivisible loads. These are large HGVs, and we're proposing to use the same roads as the substation build-out. So that's why intuitively it looks like we would have to increase the road capacity for this project. But as long as we are using the same roads as Murray East, that doesn't look like it has to be required. But what I would say is we are at the early stages of the design with the contractor, and if these maps change, then we would take them to the council and update our applications if we're required to do so.
Councillor Turner, please. Alan. Can everybody hear online?
No, sorry, Chair. Can't hear anything at the moment.
Just hang on then. We're changing mics.
Bigger mic to hold. You can hear me now? So
Yes, indeed. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So Councillor Alan Turner, Chair of Infrastructure Services Committee. A couple of technical questions, if I may. Okay, so you're effectively you're wanting to join 2 substations together. So am I right? Would that be a 400 kV rating? Okay, so that's the first one. The second one, what would be the power that you're actually transmitting? Because where I'm thinking of it is an individual one type cable, or what sort of bundle of cables? And where I'm coming from here is I'm trying to think, is it's trenching you're effectively going to do? Is it they're all trenched in one trench, or would they be spread out, you know, there'd be a separate cable and a separate trench? I'm also curious in terms of it's how you join. Is it a case it's a single length of cable it's run, or is it a case you need to actually splice them and join separate sections as you're actually building this? I'm just curious and just the aspects of all of that. I guess enough to start with.
Good question. I'm very happy to say that I am a lowly planner and environmental assessor, and I won't be answering all those questions. I will be passing them on. I can answer the easy one, and that's it will be delivered in one long length of cable, and it will be joined in jointing bays, and that I think was one of the questions that Councillor Taylor had already asked. But I'm going to pass to my colleague Chris, who will be able to answer your questions.
Hi, good morning. Can you hear me before I start speaking? Hi, can you hear me now? Good morning. I'm
Can we
Chris
just
McKeown.
check it? We can hear Chris online.
Yep.
Speak again.
Yes,
Sorry, can you hear me online?
yes, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Hi, good morning. Chris McKeown, I'm the Senior Transmission Project Manager for Caledonia. So to answer your question, which was, it's going to be delivered in sections. So those sections are based on basically the size of a cable drum that can be delivered, as Darren says, to go in line with the roads and our transport arrangements. So that's approximately between 800 to 1 kilometre on a drum. So then that would dictate how many joint bays there would be within that 3 kilometre route that you've seen on the screen. So there was a question about the number of joint bays. That will be obviously subject to the final design, exactly where they will be. The joint bays themselves are approximately 18 metres by 10 metres in size. However, they will be underground as well. So they will be reinstated on top. The only overground infrastructure that remain will be the inspection chambers that are required for the maintenance, which are it's about a 4 metre squared area that will contain the inspection chambers. The power, yeah. So and again, sorry, yes, you're right. The number of trenches. So there will be approximately 4 trenches. 2 for each phase of the project, basically. Each of these trenches will contain three cables in trefoil arrangement and a triangular arrangement. Another question, sorry. Power, overall power, up to 2 gigawatts of power. Okay. Thank you.
Can I just follow up from Councillor Davidson's question? And I suppose it's actually a question for Sarah, really. You commented about operating within a forum and working with other operators as well. Are we able to condition that?
I think we would be nervous about doing something like that just in terms of enforceability, but we would certainly encourage operators to go down that route. And we're aware it happens, I think, around Maryhill already. So it would certainly be something we would encourage. Whether we would actually enforce it is probably a different question.
Okay. And again, another follow-up, Chris. The jointed bays, I appreciate it'll depend upon where the end of the cable is and such like, but could they be positioned on fence lines near the roads rather than in the middle of a field, is where I'm coming from?
Yeah, thanks. That's a good question. The joint bays will be positioned with engagement with the landowners as much as possible. Obviously, there is a dependence on the design, and it's not, but where it is feasible to move them to a position that does not causes the least impact to their properties, then yes, we will absolutely do that.
Thank you. Councillor Forsyth, Alistair, please.
Yeah, you made mention on recruitment of a workforce, and it's quite important that we see that recruitment directly in the Aberdeenshire area. And just by way of introduction, I'm Alistair Forsyth, Councillor for Turriton District. I just want you to expand more on how you're going to apply a workforce to these schemes in the long term as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the question. At this stage, for a 3 kilometre long underground cable, it's difficult for us to set conditions on percentages of how many people locally will be employed. Our focus is on the offshore wind farm because we will be there for 35 years. I think this application for Caledonia Wind Farm is for 35 years. So that'd be 35 years of long-term employment. So we're engaging with local schools, colleges, universities, introducing the concepts of welding. So we have a virtual reality welding machine that sits in the back of an electric van and travels around schools to allow people to see that there is potential jobs in offshore wind. at this stage, we've not yet got a contractor on board for the Caledonia project. We're underway in trying to locate the contractors by requesting prices from them and designs from them in the works. What I would say is that on the Murray West project, we looked at securing local contractors through our lead contractor, and I believe that we had a contractor called Robertson's who was involved in building the joint bays and the substations. So we've got a track record of securing local contractors to support the major contractors we have. So our major contractors were Nexans for installing the cables on Murray West. The contractor for building the substation was Siemens on Murray West, and it's difficult to hire really those highly skilled technical jobs of connecting those high voltage cables in a location where there's not been that investment historically. What we're hoping to do through this project is allow the contractors to start investing in this area, and we've seen Sumitomo looking to they're building a factory, I think, on their high voltage power cables. So projects like this one, when they come through and they get approval and they start to get built, they bring the supply chain here, and that allows people to transfer across from oil and gas. It allows people to go to university and want to be electrical engineers, mechanical engineers, civil engineers, because they can see that pathway to having this as a career. But for this single application, it's very challenging to have a jobs number, a commitment to hiring local. But our track record has been about doing that because we see the benefits for us in building that supply chain, because ultimately we would go on to hire these people to work on our long-term project. And that's what's happened with Murray West when we've employed technicians locally. Appreciate that. It's not going to answer your question, but at this stage it's really tricky. Thank you.
Councillor Stirling, please, Anne.
Yeah, thanks very much. And I should have said I was a councillor for the Turriff and District area as well. So apologies for that, Chair. Perhaps this is for the planning service and yourselves, but happy to leave it on the table when the report comes for the report coming back. But at what point does this application, or would this application be included in our consideration of community wealth building? We've just issued a statement from the planning service around how community wealth building actually will be a feature of consideration, or be a consideration for planning applications such as the energy applications going forward. So will that be included in this determination? And I suppose for yourselves, you mentioned compensation for loss of agricultural land on a temporary basis, but what compensation is there through the community wealth building process for the residents of that area? Because you can see from the maps and where your application will cut across. So what's the community wealth building being factored in for residents and local families out with your compensation process for loss of agricultural land? So maybe if maybe Sarah and Elizabeth could advise at what point does this application fall within that, and then if you don't have, the report's coming back, so perhaps it's something you wanted to consider further, but will this be included in this determination?
Yeah, I mean, we'll also expand on it more in discussion, but yes, the community wealth building strategy would apply. It's now an Aberdeenshire Council document. So yes, I think yes, the answer to your question.
I can't answer your question, but I might be able to pass to my colleague Craig. I think what we've tried to do is try and avoid impacts on communities through our site selection. So trying to be as far away from properties as possible, trying to take as much of the traffic off the road network as possible. We're aware that the Scottish Government are looking to potentially introduce community payments for projects. That's something that we're monitoring, and if that is something that the Scottish Government introduces, and we would obviously comply with that as a responsible developer. I don't know if Craig, you want to.
There's a couple of points that thank you. Craig Mulroy, Communications Manager for Caledonia Offshore Wind Farm. It's a very, very difficult thing to have, in contrast to the project that I was previously here speaking to you about the Caledonia project in total, a 2,000 megawatt wind farm, which will be standing in the community for 30 years, 40 years perhaps, because those are mechanical apparatus that require ongoing maintenance, just like any other power station, and therefore require human intervention on a daily basis to keep power flowing to where it might usefully be used. If we were to tell you that we were going to install an underground cable that required to be maintained daily and required to have people replacing bits of it daily, we would rightly be told by the regulators that we were undertaking a project that should not be undertaken, and we should use materials that were far more robust. And in this modern day and age, an underground cable should be something that could more or less be installed and left to minimal maintenance. That's not to say it'll be left entirely alone. It's checked each year to make sure it's in order, but it doesn't require a great deal of upkeep. The difficulty for that, it has the advantage that it doesn't require a huge amount of maintenance that requires to be paid through people's bills. But the flip side of that is that it doesn't create employment, and it doesn't therefore build wealth in the same way as an enterprise such as a shop or a factory would build wealth. To get round that, the government have taken matters in a slightly different direction, and they have examined the new generation, if you want to call it that, of electricity infrastructure around the country, and they've taken it in total as a scheme that requires to be taken account of at local level, exactly as you have outlined. And they're examining both at Westminster and at Holyrood the ways in which that might be done. And I think what they envisage in terms of community wealth building is a scheme that directly relates distance of local residents to new electricity infrastructure and a direct financial compensation that is associated with that. Now, their scheme is at an early stage, but our planning application is at an early stage. And I would certainly anticipate that as we move forward, that we'll certainly be among the first of the electricity transmission projects that comes associated with this new sort of national scheme that can be described as community wealth building directly associated with electricity transmission infrastructure. Hope that's helpful.
Through you, Chair, can I come back? I'm happy to leave this on the table, but Aberdeenshire Council have just issued a document about community wealth building, and that would be extant in terms of this application. So happy to leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bear with me a second, because I did have a query on the tributaries of the Greensburn and flooding, and it was referred to in paragraph 2.7, I think. Just interested to know, no, sorry, that was the temporary land drains and maintenance of that. So I'm interested to hear how that particular process and how these drains would be maintained during the construction period.
At this stage, we've undertaken the base environmental studies to look at what habitats are present along those field drains, and we've sought to avoid flooding wherever possible in our routing. At this point in time, as we don't yet have a contractor on board, we don't have finalised designs of how the drains will be crossed through the open trenching method and what mitigation will be applied. But we have supplied an outline code of construction environmental management plan, which details the possible mitigations which would be applied to prevent damage to both the drains themselves, to prevent flooding, to prevent damage to the habitat, and to prevent the impacts of flooding on our assets by avoiding placement of, for example, fuel generators in areas of standing plant too close to those watercourses. So at the moment, I don't have an answer for you, but when we go to MSC stage, we will have a finalised construction environmental management plan, which will take account of flood protection on the environment and flood prevention impact on us within that document.
Okay, thank you. And if it's through MSC, as was commented earlier, local councillors would be informed of these developments and how they're going to proceed. Have we any further questions for the applicant? I see no hands, so I take it that I can move on. It is approaching 11 o'clock. Do you want a break or would we? Okay, that seems very forceful. Let's take a break and return at 11:15.
Thank you, Chief.
on this application. So I'm going to turn to our next presentation, which is one of the consultees, 5A Northern Norman Winfrota Community Council, and Dr. Catherine Vincent. Catherine, are you able to continue, please? Now you're on mute at the minute if you're speaking. Is Catherine present? Have you any other contact, Claire, to get Catherine?
Chair, I wonder if I try and contact Catherine in the background and we move on to the next speaker in the meantime?
I think that's what we'll do. Okay, so the next speaker is Louise Davidson. Please. So you'll have, yes, if you come forward, you'll have 10 minutes.
I hope everyone can hear me. Yes. My name's Louise Davidson, and I would describe myself as a local resident, a neighbour of the area that you're proposing to tear apart.
If I could just interrupt, can I check online that everybody can hear you?
Yes, thank you, Chair.
Yes, you can.
Okay, good. Thank you, Louise.
I wanted to start in a slightly more light-hearted way. Reading through all these applications for all these projects towards net zero, I was sort of amazed at the number of objections generally compared to the dearth of support for these projects. And I would throw it back at both the council and the developers to bear in mind that you may be pushing your way through, but that there are an awful lot of people who are not happy with the way this has been done or what is proposed. I think my main objection to this application is the lack of detail. Now, this has been in part explained that this is only in principle and that the detail will be following. However, how are we expected to make decisions if there isn't enough detail there? I mean, the actual route that you're intending taking is so vague, so wide, it could impact on various people and they don't necessarily know it. I'm also aware that more detailed maps exist and have been produced by Caledonian, but they aren't publicly accessible. And this immediately causes suspicion as to why that is the case. And it would be interesting to know whether Aberdeenshire Council has these detailed maps if we don't. I think the most obvious query I have with Caledonian is why, when you were told you were no longer able to connect to New Deer 1, why didn't you change your site? Why didn't you buy another one that was adjacent to Greens? It looks actually as if your cable from the coast runs fairly close to the Greens substation and then disappears down to New Deer 1 virtually, only for you to turn around and take it back up to Greens. Now, to me, it doesn't make any sense. Either you need to change your site or SSEN have to be persuaded to allow you to carry on and connect to New Deer 1. Why are local residents always the fall guys? This isn't necessary, but you choose to do it. I'm worried about the safety of local residents with a proliferation of cables both underground and overhead. We know that they aren't good to live near. And it literally is. There's one household that has, we think, 3 potential cables passing by. Now, anyone living there, particularly young people who may have to spend a lifetime with these magnetic fields, it isn't a good outlook at all. And you're imposing that. And it's important that all these different projects talk to one another and try and streamline what's going on. It doesn't appear that way at all. I think the map that was shown earlier shows just what a guddle you have created already, and very little has actually been done. The road traffic problem, you seem to think the roads are up to the increased traffic. I think local residents would beg to differ and can quote all sorts of problems. I'm also unclear. You mentioned that you would be using the same road as Murray East, but my memory was Murray East were told they had to come down from the top of Bruce Hill via Keenan's. Is that what you're doing? I'm not totally sure. So I do think that's an issue. And Murray East was heavily criticised for the lack of traffic management. The locals were not happy. So don't pretend. The water supply, possibly you are aware of how significant it is. Aberdeenshire Council certainly should be, because you will have all the information about how many have private water supplies. Who is going to cover the monitoring of that? You know, are you taking responsibility that you may well affect water supplies? You should in fact be offering to do the monitoring from now, before you start work, right through until well after it's completed, because there can be a time delay, we know that. The impact on local ecology, I'll leave others to go into detail on that, but there is an impact. And certainly I know your environmental assessment at one of the consultations had missed out quite a number of different animals and whatever birds that we know exist in the area. And I think it is very important that you clarify when your assessments are done and over what sort of a period, because it varies tremendously what you'll pick up. The cumulative effect of all of these proposals, and I know that's something the council seem to be having difficulty stressing or accepting. I think most of us local residents might have put up with New Deer 1, Murray East, maybe 1 or 2 others, but we're getting something like 9 to 14 different bits going on, all in this one rural area, and you are going to ruin it. It's going to be absolutely awful. A very important aspect of this whole thing is the monitoring. You went on, I think it was Caledonian, about good constructor or whatever it is. And I was thinking, who defined this? What does it mean? And who's checking to make sure it is happening? And the same with your traffic management. There's no point in making all these statements. You're going to be the most wonderful outfit in God's earth unless you evidence that. And the evidence actually should be collected by somebody impartial, not yourselves, and not someone paid by yourselves, because that wouldn't be impartial. And I would suggest possibly the council should be offering to do it or saying they will do it, or the community council. The community council may be the best ones, you know, closest to it. But definitely monitoring is a major issue, and it is, I think, a responsibility of the councillors and the council to make sure it happens. I think I'm going to stop there. The only other thing I would say is I was absolutely delighted that some of the Aberdeenshire councillors managed to be brave enough to refuse a planning permission of one of these net zero projects. And I know that Highland have just done the same. So I do think it is time that not only Aberdeenshire Council, but the Scottish Government, and probably most importantly, Westminster, in particular, Ed Miliband, realises that the country is not behind it. There is a place for renewable energy. We've had solar panels for years, but I don't think it should supersede the rights of citizens to have a reasonable life. And we're not getting compensated. We're not getting anything out of this. You're ruining our area and offering us nothing in return.
Thank you very much indeed. Can I open it to questions? Councillor Hassan, Andrew, please.
Not so much a question, Chair, just a request that before the report comes to the two committees, the Speaker's referenced maps, detailed maps that she feels is quite important. And because it's been mentioned in this hearing, I would actually like to be notified as to where to find them before we have the discussion at committee. Because the Speaker's evidence that, you know, there's a strong need to be seeing them, and they've been referred today. So I think it's important that we do get access to those. Just a point, Chair.
Thank you. Would the planners like to comment?
Thanks, Chair. Just say that we only have the information that's before us. We don't have any other maps, and it is obviously a planning permission and principal application. So essentially, all we do need is a red line boundary. This is what's before us. Is all we have. We're not hiding anything. That would, yeah, be for that.
Can I turn to the applicant to respond?
We can't design a red line boundary and do an impact assessment without having a rough idea of where cables might be located. But the designs that we've based our assessment on aren't finalised. The process that we are going through just now of employing a contractor, it'll be up to them in liaison with our technical team and the council to determine where the cables will be located, where the accesses will be located, where the crossing points will be located. So the danger of introducing drawings into the public domain is that they're incorrect, and that sets expectations that that's where cables will be, and it might not be, because it prejudges where the detailed surveys that we've yet to undertake will say we can put cables. So those drawings were to help us understand how much soil might be moved, where might the soil go, where might the cables be, so that we could then estimate how many lorries are involved in moving that soil, how many lorries might be on the road. Because we can't just take Murray West and say that's going to be an identical project. We have to base it on something. So I don't think we would look to release those drawings because they're not going to be final.
So could I summarise and comment that we're on a journey, and we're probably not even halfway there yet.
It's right at the start. So this is us determining, is it feasible to put cables in this location? Is it wide enough to store the soil to put the cables? Is it feasible to bring traffic through these roads based on what other projects are potentially going to be building at the same time as us? And we've determined through that study that the effects are limited. They are limited to construction, and they are temporary as a result of construction. So I would agree.
Yes, indeed.
Just for clarity then, so these maps that were presented to the public were indicative maps, not to be used in the application. Have I picked up correctly?
The maps that were in the public domain just now that show the red line boundary, those are the locations that we would expect to be putting in infrastructure. The contextual maps that were provided to landowners are to help them understand what might be the land take, but the cables might not be in those positions. It's just to demonstrate that there will be an X number of trenches, X number apart. This is the area that we may have to compensate you for during the construction. They're not finalised because the contractor's not on board yet to disagree with those designs. Because as good as Chris is, he's not going to be the person that's going to be digging those trenches and putting the cables in and jointing them. The contractor might disagree, and if we've committed to putting cables exactly in those locations and they disagree, it means that we would have to come back and go through the process with this process and with landowners to try and roll back on expectations that we've set, and I think that's unfair.
Councillor Davidson, please. Isabel.
My apologies, it's not for the speaker, but it's really for further clarification then. So why would you put in an application before it gets to the stage that there's really enough information to satisfy, I guess, councillors, probably councillors and members of the public? And what is the time scale for the matter specified in condition that you're looking at putting in?
Thank you. I'm glad you've asked that question, because it helps to show that we are trying to be a responsible developer. If we came in with a finalised design and imposed that on the community to say, that's your design, take it, then how would the local community to react to that? We want to be building a project that takes people's opinions on board, where we can collect survey data that we've not been able to collect during the surveys because of inclement weather, or we've not got a surveyor out all of the time. We want to design projects that will fit in the landscape, not impact on it and upset people, because we're not just building one project, we're building Caledonia, and the next phase of Caledonia comes. If we burn relationships locally with people who live beside the project, with the councillors and with the planning system, it means building that second project is going to be a nightmare, and it means that we're not going to be able to go home and sleep at night because we don't want to be building bad projects. So we are at the start of the journey. We know that we can build a project within that red line boundary, but we've yet to undertake the detailed surveys, the detailed design and the detailed assessment so that we know what mitigation we're putting in and that it's going to work.
So what's your time scale?
I don't know if that went through the microphone.
The question was, what is the time scale?
The timescales for us, the earliest that we'd look to build the project would be 2029. This summer and spring, we begin our environmental surveys. We're due to commission an environment consultant on that. The surveys begin end of March, the start of April. It's ecology surveys generally that we're undertaking on specific areas of land where we've identified that there might be species present that we weren't fully able to assess at the time we visited. So that's infill ecology surveys. Last Friday, the contractor. So we issued a request for prices from electricity contractors for substation build and cable build to help us on the designs. That's quite a long-lasting process, and the environmental studies that we undertake and the designs from the contractor converge. And if, say for example, we identify that there is a badger set in a specific area, we would look to avoid that. If it's possible to avoid impacting on private water supplies through changing the design, that's where the surveys and the private water supplies studies come in to influence the design. So do you want to talk through the MSC process? Because you know it better. So I'll pass to my colleague Jess.
My name is Jess and I'm the onshore consenting manager for the project. So just to give you a little bit of context, where we are just now with the planning application, and can you hear me okay? I'm just checking.
I think they can. I'm sure online there's no hands to
Yes,
indicate.
thanks.
Okay, lovely. So what we're trying to do right now is to we are at the stage, and what my colleague has mentioned, we are procuring an onshore civil contractor, but at the same time, we are procuring an onshore environmental consultant who will undertake those detailed assessments. And that includes also the survey effort that is being currently scheduled. So the idea right now is that we're going to gather all this information, collect the data, and that will feed into the detailed design. And ultimately, the plan is, this is something that I have not discussed yet with the council, but internally the plan is to align the discharge of the planning matters for the 400 kV cable with the wider Caledonia project. And that's ideally will be all submitted around Q3 2027. So we will start preparing the detailed design early next year, and that's gonna hopefully grow arms and legs. And during that process, we will liaise with all the consultees and the council as well. And ultimately, yeah, it takes a while, but I think it's just it requires a lot of time and a lot of assessment to get to the point in which we can confidentially state that the project we are proposing is on balance feasible, but also environmentally conscious. I don't know if that answers the question. How you?
Any other queries? I have a query. I suspect it would be to the speaker, but you raised the issue of health, electromagnetic fields and such like. What information or how can that aspect be minimised? And what information do you have?
I'd probably look to pass on to Chris, but what I would say on electromagnetic fields is that the best mitigation is distance. So for pylons, is to have as much air distance between the cables and people's homes as possible. And for underground cables, it's burial depth, so that it's shielding those EMFs from people being affected by them. So the distance from whoever is receiving EMF and the EMF source. I think the other thing just to keep in mind is that we are every day surrounded by EMFs. There's EMFs in this room from the electricity sockets that are sitting behind us. And I think before I ramble anymore, I'll pass across to Chris. He'll answer your question.
I'm going to be slightly unconventional here and choose to speak over Chris, allowing perhaps experience to triumph over education. Simply being for the fact I live next to one of these cables in Edinburgh, a 275 kilovolt cable that runs past my front door and past a sports field on its way to the city centre. National Grid operate their cables a normal operating magnetic field of 31 microteslas. That figure might not mean a lot, but if you compare to a vacuum cleaner or other apparatus with an electric motor, you'll find that that has an electric field strength of 50 microteslas or upwards. And if you compare it to the Earth itself, the Earth has a magnetic field that will influence a compass in the order of 25 to 65 microteslas. So at 31 microteslas, the underground cable doesn't produce a field that is above the Earth's magnetic field under its operating conditions by the grid. That all applies to underground cables, and the magnetic effect diminishes rapidly with distance, obviously the shielding effect of being 1 metre below the ground. I would be confident in saying we have a lot of experience with underground cables in this country. So I'm very, very confident in saying, along with the very considerable wealth of work that has been done by National Grid and others on the effects of magnetic fields, that we have been living with the electric industry and their magnetic fields for many, many years with no ill effects, and there is a wealth of published information to that effect.
I would only just add that so the cable design that we are using is governed by very strict British and international standards. We're using the same designs that SAC, for example, National Grid would use. We're not reinventing the wheel here. We're using established cable designs, and as Darren said, as Craig said, we're following the guidelines for burial depths as well to make sure that we will be in agricultural land about 1.2 metres to the top of the first cable. And I would also just add that, pick up a point I made earlier about the cables themselves are buried in a trefoil formation, which means they're basically a triangle shape, which helps to cancel any magnetic fields as well, and there's a bit of science behind it, which I won't go into. But so not only the cable design itself, which has shielding included, it's the conductor is within concentric circle in the middle of the design, and also the trefoil formation, which helps to cancel the effects of magnetic forces.
Thank you very much. Are there any further queries, questions? I don't see any hands, so can I thank you very much indeed for your contribution. I'm going to turn back to Dr. Catherine Vincent. I hope the technology is working and we can see you at least. Thank you very much, Catherine. So over to you. You'll have 10 minutes.
Good morning, councillors. Thank you. I was not able to find the mute button. Thank you, Chair, for the opportunity to present our objection today. I'm Dr. Catherine Vincent, representing the 5E Rothian-Ormond-Montewitter Community Council. Prior to discussing the core of our objections, I'd like to note that community councillors are all volunteers and amateurs representing our community, unlike those who work for the developer and the council. As such, we've put together our objections using common parlance rather than the most accurate technical wording, and hope that councillors take this into account. The issues our community members have raised for this project stem from 3 general failings: the volume of projects in this area, the lack of stakeholder engagement, and a failure to adequately plan and explain details. This immediate area already hosts 1 SSEN substation, which is in the midst of expansion, a 2nd substation being built. In addition, there's 1 ocean wind substation already built, with multiple other offshore wind substations, either approved for construction or in the application process. There are multiple BESS sites planned either in the same road or within a stone's throw of the villages of Coniston, 5E, and New Deer. With this sort of massive construction, oversight and coordination is key. However, what residents found at the first consultation was that the Caledonia team essentially admitted that a lack of coordination with key stakeholders, essentially SSEN, is the reason this additional pipeline is being required, despite the full project being approved and set directly next to the New Deer 1 substation. It appears there's a failure to communicate between these 2 multinational corporations about who was connecting where. Representatives of the FRMCC and members of the public highlighted the failures of communication to councillors at the PDH for the full Caledonia project in February of 2024, noting that they had not consulted with the people of our area, they did not seek approval from landowners prior to announcing their route, and when they spoke with the FRMCC after the application was submitted, the Caledonia representatives were clear about there being no intention to work with the Community Council on issues around safety or economic impact on the project. The FRMCC were offered a sit-down mediated by the chair of the Fort Martin Area Committee to discuss this issue. We accepted, but nothing has come from this offer from either the council or the Caledonia team, including issues around this continuing project. Notes from the public consultation events reported from Caledonia team have brought up the issues surrounding the failure to work constructively with members of the community by the same company on a previous project. Their response have been reassured that this time it will be different. However, as noted above, the entire project and the current issue at hand have both shown a lack of active, receptive response to stakeholders, both powerful and local. Finally, community members have been attempting to find out more information about the details of the project. We've received reports the application includes vague directions about the location of the project, which cover homes and farms which have not given permission. In addition, there have been many questions about the safety of the project, both regarding the technology present and the traffic management that have not been answered. Instead, members of the public have been assured that this planning in principle, so details have not been worked out. Do not find there sufficient information for the public to feel comfortable with the decision being made on the project, particularly with the experience this community have had in the past with similar projects, including by this same company. Failing to follow through on the promises made, and a council planning team so underfunded that they have no time or power to enforce planning requirements after permission has been granted. Our written representation goes into detail on the ways in which these concerns impact upon material conditions of planning, but we give a brief overview. The high volume of traffic on residential and farm roads. These roads are utterly insufficient for the plans that are already in place, much less any additional traffic. Cumulative traffic will destroy the roadway, devastate families who depend on it as their only access route. Traffic plans promise to work with other stakeholders, but we don't have any evidence that this developer would work in good faith with our community after previous failures. Contrary to assertions from developers, it's an active travel route. Though the council may not have it on their maps, we still use it. We have links to many other active travel and cycling routes in the area. It's used both as transport between communities and a recreational route. It's an amenity being stripped from the community. A strong part of the move to net zero is support for active travel, considering transportation is one of the largest contributions to greenhouse gases, and the crushing of an active travel route damages this significantly. Safety concerns about the number of high voltage lines going overhead and underground have been raised by residents and not been responded to. This is in addition to concerns raised by the UK government about the dangers of BESS sites in proximity to high voltage lines. This project proposes running a high voltage line exceptionally close to the Abbotsford BESS proposed site. Aberdeenshire Council planning officers are aware via email from a community council on another project that developers are expected to demonstrate compliance with the IC and IRP guidelines for public health reassurances. We've not seen this. According to the FP4, there's presupposition towards the granting permission to renewable projects as long as it's balanced with the ecological and economic situation of the area. This project is damaging our primary economic activity, fails to support us in any other way. This has been established that this is prime agricultural land during a time of food insecurity. In addition, vague maps of where the pipeline is planned leaves farmers with the specter of forced buyouts and serious questions about future investments. Farming requires long-term planning. This type of chaos does not serve our community at all. Between the damage done by other projects, vague notions of new destruction, the failure to clean up after a previous project, and accusations of unfixed damage to peripheral properties, this is not a place for long-term investment. No detailed local economic benefit. Scottish Government have full plans and best practice for offshore wind farm and community benefit. Thus far, there's been no discussion of economic benefit or a community fund. In fact, we have been completely rebuffed by Caledonia team when they visited the community council last November, promising that only that we would get a lower energy prices, which is beyond their control. We're aware that community benefit levels and governance are completely within the gift of the UK government, but not planning considerations, but the completely negative economic impact of this project on our community is a planning consideration, as the current method of only handing sporadic funds to councillors rather than community contradicts the Scottish Government's just transition and community wealth building policies. And a final note from this meeting, the ecological survey is planned to be, they just said that it was going to be taking place at a time when SSEN will be doing a significant amount of drilling and disturbing behavior right in this area. So this means animals will be disturbed, and then you will go in and investigate what's left. I'm wondering how is this proving that you're actively working with other developers? Thank you all for your time.
Thank you very much indeed. Can I turn to members for questions or queries? Andrew, Councillor Hassan, please.
Not so much a question for Ms Vincent, but a question back to the officers. The consultees just advised us they don't feel they've had all access to all the information they require to give a formal response to this application. Can we ask if, prior to this coming to any committee, that request for the extra information for them to be consulted on is honoured? Because I do feel that I would value an informed response from that consultee. Thank you.
I think I'll go back to the point. It's a planning permission in principle application, and there's essentially all you really need is a red line boundary. So we don't believe there's any additional information required in support of this application at this point in time.
Councillor Stirling, please.
Yeah, thanks very much. Again, not a question for Dr. Vincent, but just based on the answer from the planning service, how can we justify taking decisions on applications? Because given the timeline that we've heard from the developer and the timeline you've shown for decision making, how can we justify making decisions without the information around EIAs, around connection points, and all these details? And you know, if it's considered acceptable to go down the matter specified by condition, I think that may well be a debate that you'll encounter at committee. But how again, justification for making a decision based on lack of information, and you know, again, how safe is it in terms of being able to take that forward should there be any challenges? So maybe it's something that you want to take away and consider, but I think if it's appropriate, it may not be, but I think I would give notice that that would not be something that I would consider either safe to do or able to be justified. Thank you.
Thanks. Yeah, I think I'll just reiterate, we're dealing with a planning permission principle application, and it does, the process does allow for a lot of the subsequent information to come in as a matter specified in a conditional application. So a lot of the information would be conditioned. So we are content with the level of information at this point. I don't want to stray into discussion at this point in time, but is that, yeah.
Any other queries or questions from members? Councillor Corson, Jeff, please.
Thanks, Chair. I want to try and put a bit of perspective on this, just to clarify some of the things that the talkers have been talking about. So we're talking about 400 megawatts. If my information rights is right, so a megawatt would be about 1,000 kilowatts. 400,000 kilowatts would power about 100,000 homes, average 4 kilowatts a home. So we're saying that this has been discussed for quite a lot of years, but we're also saying that SSEN are only offering connections over at New DR for this project. Wasn't people talking to each other a way back at the start of this and recognise the need that this sort of scale and size of stuff might have been better placed near our towns and cities? When was these sort of discussions discussed and decided that projects like this would come as far as New DR, where there's nothing like 100,000 homes? And why is it happening in this area as opposed to near our towns and cities? Thanks.
I'm going to turn to the legal officer.
Thank you, Chair. I would just like to remind councillors that we're here to discuss the application in question. I'm struggling to see the relevance of that particular point, councillor. So I would just like to remind members that we're here to discuss this particular application before us.
I believe it could come under whether it's in the right place, scale and size place, and local benefits. I don't see that necessarily the community that's taking the burden is going to get the benefits as much as people from other areas are going to get the benefits. So whether it should be considered that something like this should be near their doorsteps, I think it's relevant to this application.
Thank you, councillor. It was just in relation to the historical discussions. I was just more meaning in relation to that part. If your question is focused on the site in question, then that is, I see, relevant. But it was just in relation to the historical discussions that have been happening.
I think that's just putting perspective on the question, but I take your point. Thank you.
Would the applicant like to comment on the selection of the site?
Is it selection of the site as in the 400 kV cable from Burnside to Greens? That's the only part that I can comment on, because I wasn't involved in the site selection for Burnside, but I was involved tentatively in the site selection for the 400 kV cables. So we followed a relatively detailed process of identifying what is the least impactful route to get from Burnside to Greens, what is the shortest route, because the longer your route, the more likely you are to impact on people who live around the route and on the environment that the route is going to be hosted on. So some of the constraints, the things that we sought to avoid were flood zones. We tried to avoid flood zones as far as possible. We tried to avoid properties. As we've shown, we've cut out areas from a red line boundary where there are properties and added a buffer. We've sought to avoid woodland and local tree lines. We have sought to avoid having to HDD, for example, below those woodlands. We've sought to avoid areas that are potentially peatland and what are called groundwater dependent terrestrial ecosystems. And we've tried as far as possible to avoid homes based on where the private water supply is going to be secured from. So that's the basis that we've selected the route. We also need to make sure that the route is wide enough for flexibly locating the cables and the haul roads. if we go in with too narrow a route, then we don't have the ability to take cognizance of things that come up in the environmental surveys, things that come up during our engagement with landowners and property owners from where their private water supplies are actually sourced, whether it may be fields, whether it may be boreholes, whether it may be water courses adjacent to fields. So the route is designed to avoid impacting on people and the environment as much as possible, but also trying to be mindful that it needs to be wide enough that we can take account of future information and not just impose a design on people or the environment. I don't know if that answers the question for Councillor Crowson.
Are you happy with the response, Councillor Crowson?
Well, I think it answered the only part of it, but I think I made my point, so I'll leave that there. Thanks.
Thank you. Did I see Councillor Sullivan's hand up? It's disappeared.
You did, Chair, but I realised I was going to ask about the previous planning application. So.
Oh, okay, thank you. Councillor Gifford, Jim, please.
Yeah, well, I kind of am as well. I mean, it's just, I mean, for many years, and people have talked about it earlier on, that there is no overall plan for where all this infrastructure should go across the whole of the country. We're just getting the applications in one at a time. As people have mentioned, every time we get one, we're only seeing one part of the jigsaw, not the whole picture. So, you know, we have to deal with what's in front of us. But just in terms of the wider picture, if the permission to connect was changed, should the whole process not have stepped back more than just one step to look at where a new cable needs to go, but to look at where the actual connection point is? You know, if you're having to join up 2 points, one of the solutions is to move one of the points, surely.
Is that a planning matter?
I would say in planning terms, we're dealing with the application that's before us, so that's not the question for us. If you want the applicant to comment, then they might be able to comment further. But
I will turn to the applicant.
I can answer in terms of the route that we've selected for Caledonia on-Tee is the best route, and ultimately if we had to build a substation close to Greens it would follow the same route, but the Burnside substation is also located in the best position that it could be in the environment. Otherwise we may look to change it, but its potential to be shielded from local residents, it's adjacent to roads that can handle the traffic as we've demonstrated, and that the onward connection onto Greens is also technically feasible to build and environmentally feasible to mitigate any impacts when we're building it. So I don't think that the routing would change because we've already demonstrated that this is the best route from the constraints process that we follow.
Okay, thank you.
I don't see any further hands, so I'm now going to turn to the final presentation from Lorna Sterling.
Now, being last to speak, I realise there'll be a bit of repetition, so just bear with me. I'm Lorna Sterling from Greenfield, Commonston. I wish to object to this application and cover 3 areas today. Number 1, location of the site. Number 2, the type of land use proposed. And number 3, the amount of development. First one, location of the site. I object to this application from Caledonia as its 2 small substations are close to its New Deer 1 substation, which is owned by Moray East and SSE. Moray East and Caledonia are part of the same Ocean Winds group, so it makes much more sense to have planned to get a grid connection from its own New Deer 1 substation and not cross miles of productive farmland to hook up to the Greens substation. SSE have recently added 4 bays to New Deer 1. Surely these 2 companies can talk to each other about grid connections. They seem to be very secretive about their preferred route along this corridor, only giving us postcodes to go by. AB53 6XT, which is the Maryhill area, beside the Old Greens pub, and AB535YQ, which is my postcode. And it must be the postcode of the Greens substation as well, because I live just across the road from that. On the 18th of September, we received a map from Caledonia with a cable route on it that went through one of our fields at Greenfield. This was weeks before their public consultations in October. And at these consultations, I was surprised, which was a consultation on the cable route, I was surprised to see just a general area like the one in their application. And the employee I spoke to had no knowledge of a detailed map. Therefore, the public were deprived of this information. In fact, there was not enough information at the public consultation to give the public a chance to make an informed decision. On to number 2, the type of land use proposed. There will be a series of trenches and a road alongside. This whole part will be 100 metres wide. Food production is a critical sector for our island nation. Only a couple of years ago, when our supermarket shelves were empty of vegetables, the NFU put out a rallying call to farmers to grow more veg so that we could reduce our carbon footprint and guarantee supply. The reinstatement of the land is hugely important. Contractors must know how to do this properly. Just speak to some of the farmers who hosted the oil and gas pipelines of the 70s and 80s, and 50 years down the line, they are still having problems with drainage and lack of yield down the track of the pipeline. One of the questions on the application is, will your application for new or will your application cross new or altered water supplies? And Caledonia's answer is no, but it should have been yes, as I know this general area is littered with private water supplies. The cable route they showed us goes right across where SSE has earmarked for our new water supply, as their cables cut across our existing supply. Another worrying factor is that with the introduction of their cables on our map, Caledonia has formed a magnetic field triangle around the dwelling next to ours. This is home to a young family with a child of 11 and another on the way. Caledonia's use of this land at Greenfield would be a backward step, as we already have a field out of use to accommodate Greenvolt cables and another to host SSE cables. Caledonia's would be our number 3. There are not that many acres at Greenfield, but there are quite a lot of livestock. Sheep graze there all year round, cattle are grazing in the summer, and pigs are housed inside, so are mucked out regularly, so we need the acres we have to spread their dung. On top of all this, we had a request to build 3 passing places at Greenfield for a battery storage site in the pipeline. I assure you, it's like the Wild West out there, only instead of guns and horses, they've got cables and diggers. We keep saying no to the Caledonia request, but we keep being sent heads of terms and revised heads of terms, with the threat that if we refuse, then they will instigate a compulsory order. Now, number 3, the amount of development. This development is one too many. There's a lot of talk about cumulative development, and our circumstances have shown how one is now piling on top of the other and causing havoc, not only for the residents, but also on our dangerous single-track road with its small bridge, hidden dip and blind summit. The time has come to protect the residents and communities of Aberdeenshire with a robust plan
for energy development. Because of all these reasons, I ask you to reject this application.
Thank you very much indeed. Can I turn to members for questions, please? Andrew, yes.
Not a question for the speaker, but can I refer back to the applicant? The speakers advised us that a request went in for some information at an earlier stage, but it was not honoured. Can I ask why that happened? Are you regularly engaging with the local properties, advising them of what your plans are so they can properly correspond to this application? Thank you.
Just to check, was this was in the relation to Miss Stirling saying that she had received information a couple of weeks in advance of the pre-application event? I think, yeah, that would be correct, because it's right to inform landowners what we are proposing on their land before they find out in a press advert. We feel that it's good practice that people know that we are interested in their land. So yes, that information, I assume, did go out, but I don't look after land.
Any further queries? Councillor Jeff, please.
Thanks, Chair. I would just like legal to give an explanation, definition on when cumulative impact is allowed to be considered, and also emphasis on the point that was made about we take each planning application as it stands before us, and whether the crossover stops or is allowed, if that makes sense. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor. In respect of the issue of cumulative impact, I think that, to be honest, would be better directed at our planning service in the first instance. So I'll perhaps ask my colleagues to comment on that if possible, please. Thanks, Chair. Yeah, so cumulative impacts are obviously a key consideration in determination of application. I would say we'd probably get into it more in the discussion, so at the area committee and subsequently ISC. I don't want to get into discussion at this point in terms of what it involves, but it is a key consideration in the determination.
Maybe hasn't answered your question directly, but it's probably as far as we go, given that the discussion will take place at both area committee and at infrastructure services committee.
This is an information gathering part, and that's been thrown up when in several instances when we've been trying to gather information, so I think it needs clarified just now.
Councillor, that's perhaps something that I can provide further clarification on in advance of the next committee hearing and circulate if required. But as I would be worried that we are entering into discussion, as my colleague had said, and this is, as you've highlighted, purely an information gathering exercise.
I would see that as being fair enough, as long as if anybody's trying to gather information, then that points aren't made to try and prevent that information. That question's been asked just now then.
Thank you, Councillor. I'll take that on board.
Can I turn to Councillor Crawley? John, please.
Yeah, it's a question really for the applicant and the speaker there. And then the speaker's just brought up about they've had received letters about compulsory purchase. Can I just go to the applicant, because you're saying that you're a caring company, but you're actually sending letters out saying that you will compulsory purchase if you don't get agreement. Is that right?
Thank you for the question. I don't work in the land team, and I don't set the strategy for engaging with landowners, but I believe it's a standard practice for electricity and other large infrastructure projects to firstly try and seek a commercial agreement. If a commercial agreement is not possible to meet, because the projects are nationally significant infrastructure projects by the purpose that they serve, then there are rules around how a compulsory purchase can be progressed. But it's not as simple as just going out and saying to a landowner, we are going to compulsory purchase you, without trying to secure a commercial result. The CPO terms are not as attractive as securing a commercial arrangement, and the lack of securing a commercial arrangement is not something that we don't want to do, because we don't want to create bad blood, and we want to be able to collect information from the landowner to influence the design that we're going to be making, so that we don't try and track over new private water supply sources, because ultimately SSE is going to be paying for a new private water supply, and if this application is consented, then we will be having to do the exact same thing. And what you want is to have a sustainable water supply for the person that's using it for the duration that they need to use it, not for a disruption twice and a payment twice. We can't compel others to engage with us, but we want to be open and we want to collect information and we want to design a good project. But it does require other companies to want to engage with us, but we can't compel them.
Okay, John?
Yes, that's great. Thank you.
Councillor Stirling, on please.
Again, this might be information that'll come back to us, but at what point does the sustainability of an individual enterprise become an issue for consideration in terms of loss of amenity, loss of employment, loss of economic impact, or whatever else? And we've heard from Mrs. Stirling, and I would say there's no connection other than the name, just to be clear. But at what point does the cumulative impact of developments become significant on an individual enterprise, such as a farming enterprise that we've just heard about? Because we've heard about, you are the third company that are looking to acquire access across land in Mrs. Stirling's ownership. So at what point do we consider the cumulative effect, not just of developments, but of developments impacting on economic enterprises and significant enterprises for the local economy? So perhaps that's something that will come back. But I think, that, I don't think anybody will have missed the point that three separate companies with three separate developments are impacting on individual residents and residential properties and farming enterprises, and I do think that needs to be something that's taken into account. So again, that might be something that'll come back, but I think that has to be considered. Thank you.
Thank you very much. One last call for final questions. I don't see anything in the room, so I would just like to thank all speakers, both in the presentations, the questions asked of the presenters, and just make sure that all councillors have received all the information they require. So I should thank all those for attending. Reiterate that a planning report will be circulated to the Formartine Area Committee with a note of this predetermination hearing. The Area Committee will then forward its views to Infrastructure Services for its consideration. Can I just thank you for your time today, and I'll close this particular hearing. Thank you very much indeed.